All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm Leanne Liu from MCKL's Counselling Services Centre, and today we will be hosting a sexual harassment awareness forum, for which we are delighted to have invited 4 expert speakers from various fields to join us to weigh in on the matter of sexual harassment in Malaysia. The first of our panelists is Amelia Sharif, who is a managing partner of the NGO Speak Up Malaysia. Her background in law and passion for gender rights advocacy led her on the path of helping organizations and communities create safer, productive environments. She's recognized as an expert in dealing with harassment, bullying, and toxic workplaces, and is also part of the team to draft the sexual harassment bill in Malaysia. Next, we've also invited senior lawyer Omar Kuti to weigh in from a judicial perspective. He's well-versed in both general and criminal litigations, as he handles cases involving public interest and constitutional issues extensively. Some of the highlights of his career include providing legal aid to the Protection Unit of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in Kuala Lumpur. Next, we also have Kogila Vani to provide a psychological perspective. She graduated with a degree in psychology and a master's degree in counseling and guidance, and has served in RMP since 2014 as a psychology officer in D11. She has worked with child and adult victims from various types of cases, such as child abuse, sexual abuse, and domestic violence, including providing support services to family members and child offenders. Last but not least, we also have Deputy Superintendent of Police Noor Ashikin, who graduated with a degree in human resource and a master's degree in science management. She has served in the PDRM since 2005, starting with the narcotics department unit until until 2008. She then transferred to the crime investigation department and served in various divisions in the CID. Currently, she serves as the head of the sexual investigation unit in D11. Before we dive headfirst into the topic, I would first like to invite Ms. Joanne To, the head of our Counselling Services Department, to say a few words of welcome.
Thanks, Leanne. Once again, good morning to everyone. And on behalf of Counselling Services Centre, I would like to take this opportunity to welcome all of you. And we are very honoured today to have 4 very special speakers as our panel today. Welcome, Ms. Amelia, Mr. Omar, Ms. Kogila Wani, and DSP Noor Ashikin. We are very grateful to have you on board with us today. When we talk about sexual harassment, I personally find this topic to be very important to talk about because I really feel that it's really important that we create awareness as well as asking ourselves what our role to play in our family and in our society when it comes to sexual harassment. I remember during college times as a young girl who experienced sexual harassment myself. It's a very shocking experience, and during that time, I remember it as there is lack of information, there is lack of knowledge, where do I get support and what are the things that I can do next. So I believe that our session today will be very helpful and insightful to all of us here. And we believe that the panel will be able to provide us a very informative session. So once again, thank you everyone for joining. And we hope that you gain something to take back today from our session today. So back to you, Leanne.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Joanne. Feel free to send your questions and comments in the chat as well as you think of them, as they will be addressed later on in the Q&A. So to start off, this is an open question to all 4 of our forum panelists. What is sexual harassment, in your opinion?
Okay, I guess I'll go first. Basically, when we talk about sexual harassment, we are looking at 3 main ingredients or 3 main characteristics. The first one is we're looking at a conduct that is unwanted. And whether or not something is wanted or unwanted, obviously we're looking at it from the perspective of the person at the receiving end, i.e. the victim. So obviously, whether or not something is wanted is an issue of consent. And logically, when you ask about consent, it is something that that must be given according to its own set of characteristics as well. And we talk about this all the time. In order for a consent to be fully given, we look at 5 things. And to remember them easily, they are basically fries, like McDonald's fries. So F for freely given, R for reversible, I is that it must be informed. E means it is given enthusiastically, and S means that it is specific. That means consent is not just something that is given, but consent is something that people can also retract after it is given. Consent is something that is specific. For example, if I consent to holding hands with a person, that does not mean I'm consenting to a kiss. If I'm consenting to a kiss, that does not mean I'm consenting for it to be taken further than that. So understanding that consent in itself is a complicated issue, and that it can be complicated because it must be communicated, and we grow up in a society that doesn't necessarily teach us how to ask and how to give and how to retract consent. So that can be potentially a difficult part to maneuver. But ultimately the point here is that to know that ultimately the power vests in your hand. So if you decide that it is unwanted, then it fulfills the first requirement, that a behavior or an action or remark is unwanted. The second thing that we're looking at is that, of course, it has to be something of a sexual nature. Otherwise, we don't call it sexual harassment. But I want to stress something here. A lot of people think that it has to be something that is overtly sexual for it to be considered sexual. So for example, it must include pornographic material, or it must include images that are really inappropriate, but that's not true. A lot of things can be sexual, even though it is not overtly sexual. That means it can be a euphemism, it could be a joke, it could be an innuendo, it could be someone suggesting something that is sexual in nature. It could be something that is made to attack your sexuality. It could be something that denies you of your sexuality. It could be something that reduce you to a sexual object. So it could be done in many different ways, but the point is that there must be a sexual element to it. And the final thing is that we're looking at something that has a negative impact onto the person. So this means that it could be something that impacts that person well-being psychologically or physically. They could, there is like, loss of appetite, or, depression and anxiety and things like that. But it could also be something that doesn't necessarily affect your body, but it affects the environment around you. So that means now you don't feel safe going to class anymore. Or does it create a situation where you don't feel safe to go see a particular person anymore? Or does it create a situation where you feel intimidated? Or does it create a situation when you feel like you're not given an option to say no? So if all of these elements are present, then that is sexual harassment. But my advice is to not get carried away with the terminology, because I see a lot of people asking me question, is it sexual harassment? Is it sexual harassment? So my advice is to follow that gut instinct. A lot of people would describe a behavior as sleazy or gatal. So they would say, oh, this person is so gatal. This person would do this. This is such sleazy behavior, or this is so creepy. And then we ask ourselves, but is it sexual harassment though? I think it's because we're so afraid, because the term sexual harassment comes with a lot of baggage, right? So focus on that feeling and focus on how it makes you feel. Focus on the impact and the nature of that behavior. If it's sleazy, if it's gatal, chances are it is potentially sexual harassment. So that's how I would define it.
All right, thank you, Amelia. To start off though, because we're talking about sexual harassment in Malaysia, but we don't really hear about exactly how serious it is. Nur Ashikin, if you could please share some statistics about sexual harassment in Malaysia itself.
Hello, hi, good morning, everybody. So in Malaysia, statistics for sexual harassment, we investigate sexual harassment 292 Penal Code, and also for involving physical contact, so we investigate under section 354 Penal Code. So roughly in Malaysia, for slightly not so many cases,
I think your audio may be cutting out, Ms. Ashikin. I'm not sure I can hear you right now.
Yeah, actually, I can't hear either.
It might be your connection issue because it seems like your connection has a red bar on my computer.
Hi, Lian. Probably let's circle back to that.
Yeah, we'll come back to that later. But because sexual harassment is still a fairly prevalent thing in general when you hear about it on the news, it's very sensationalized, but we never really hear about who can be sexually harassed. So who can become victims of sexual harassment then?
Am I gonna go again? Okay. I think there's no really guide when it comes to who can be sexually harassed. Everyone is susceptible to it, but obviously, based on statistics, it is shown that certain gender identities are more vulnerable to sexual harassment. I have some statistics here to share with you pertaining to who's in Malaysia who's sexually harassed, and what are the propensity of it happening. So based on a survey in 2019, about 28% of Malaysians said that they have been sexually harassed. So if we were going to convert that, that's about 1 out of 4 Malaysians have been sexually harassed, which is somewhat consistent with the global standards. Because if you look at other countries who have a lot of information on sexual harassment, we are looking at 1 out of 3 women have been sexually harassed and 1 out of 6 men have been sexually harassed. So in Malaysia, out of that 28%, 36.5% are women and 16.6% are men. So about 40 and 20% there. And the rest of the victims are people who identify as either queer, or maybe they are basically they're non-binary individuals. And then out of these 28%, only 53.4% told someone about their sexual harassment experience. By telling someone, I mean they maybe tell their parents, their friends, their partner, or whatever, someone, they told someone about it. So half of those people told someone about it. And out of that number, out of the 53% of people who told someone about it, that means half just literally kept quiet and pretended like it never happened and just, tried to move forward with their life. And out of the other half that told someone about it, only 2% reported it to the police. So the statistics that we have is also because there's a severe problem of underreporting as well, right? So we are at a place in our lives where I can say that, majority of the sexual harassment victims are women, but I also can't say that conclusively because we know that there's underreporting and whatnot, which is why I think right now, as the fact stands, majority of the victims are women, about 20% is men, 20% is queer individuals, but because of underreporting, we can't quite say for sure. But another piece of statistics that I want to bring into the picture is the fact that most of the violence against women that happen, and again, this is from the perspective of a woman, majority of the harasser is known to the victim. 3 out of 5 usually is someone either they work with, their romantic partner, someone they know from school, someone basically they have like a prior relationship with this person, with the perpetrator. And 2 out of 5 is basically maybe like a common stranger, a random person they meet on the street and things like that. So hopefully that would have shed some light to answer your question, Lian, in terms of who can be sexually harassed. And on the flip side, it also means that anyone could be guilty of sexually harassing another person. It is not just something that men does. It is also something that people can do if you're not careful with the things that you said. But having said that, I think majority of the harasser are men. But like I said, it's not something that you can say if you're this gender, then you're a perpetrator. If you're this gender, you're a victim. You can't really say that. You have to look at the facts.
Yeah, that's actually fascinating because it does lead into my next question, which is that because sexual harassment and sexual abuses can be perpetrated against anyone. In your experience, have you seen a significant difference maybe in the treatment of, say, same-sex harassment cases versus opposite sex? The typical case we think of, it's a man perpetrating sexual abuses or sexual harassment against a woman.
Yeah, for sure, there are major differences. I think one of it is that the way we operate as a society is based on an expectation based on someone's gender. That means if you're a woman, you probably should do this, you should behave a certain way, it's okay for you to feel a certain way. But when you talk about a man, then, you know, it's completely different, right? It's okay for a woman to somehow feel vulnerable and say that, oh, I'm so depressed, I've been like sexually harassed, and somehow that is more acceptable in society versus when a man says it. People would probably just say things like, oh, you know, just buckle up, man up, and, you know, get past it and things like that. So because of these different expectations on gender, and the way that different genders should behave, so the way we treat when someone becomes a victim is also different, you know, because again, like, we have different preconceived notions about them. I wanted to share a case that I assisted in, where someone, so it was a situation where a person is accused of sexually harassing a woman, and this person is a man, and there is no question, there's no doubt that what he did was sexual harassment. So this woman reported it to HR, and HR is basically human resource that, you know, handles all of these cases, right? And then when HR is doing an investigation, and asked, and, you know, basically talked to the perpetrator about it, the perpetrator said, wait a minute, I can't be sexually harassing a woman because I'm gay. So I am biologically incapable of being attracted or sexually attracted to a woman. Therefore, how could I be sexually harassing a woman? So in this situation, we also see that people try to use their gender identity, they try to use their sexuality as an excuse to say that because I am of a certain gender, or because I am of a certain sexuality, therefore I can't be doing sexual harassment, or therefore I can't be a victim of sexual harassment. So again, these are like expectations that we have. So just to clarify things here, your gender and your orientation is not, it cannot be used as a defense, because like I said, sexual harassment, just because it is sexual in nature, sometimes or most of the times, it's not a wrongdoing or a crime of a because of sexual attraction or because of lust. Like a lot of violence against women, or, you know, violence, it is about power, it is about dominance, it is about exerting that control over another person. So we also have to recognize that. And the final thing I wanted to say is, I think to a large extent, we also normalize comments, and it happens differently, right? So for a woman, you probably normalize certain kind of comments, you probably normalize victim blaming jokes, and then when you're talking about a gay man, you probably normalize you know, like commenting about their attire, for example. There was another case where, you know, you say, oh, you know, colleagues were making a remark to a gay man that, oh my god, your jeans are so tight, your ass looks so good in it, as if, you know, because he's gay, he's not supposed to be offended at it. So I think, again, like I said, we have different ideas, and we put different expectations on people on how they should behave, they should be offended at, and obviously that makes it a lot more difficult to navigate sexual harassment between different genders.
All right, thank you, Amelia. Give us a moment, just to circle back to the previous questions about statistics. ASP Noor Ashikin, do you have any the statistics about sexual harassment in Malaysia?
Yeah, as I said earlier, we have a statistic for sexual harassment under section 509, which is for 2020. I just wanted to give you 2020 statistics for under 509 9, we have 379 cases. So out of these, for 48% in charge in the court. So for more or less 354, we have 838 cases. So out of these, 37% has been charged, and also for 292 section 292 penal code, we have 74 cases. I don't have the statistics for charging for 292 cases. So that's the statistics for our investigation for sexual harassment cases.
Ah, I see. But actually, to continue on with that, right? Because Amelia did mention earlier that it's not necessary that every case has to have physical contact, and because of that, it's also probably quite difficult to have physical evidence of when you're being sexually harassed, right? How can victims report their harassment if there's no such physical evidence?
In our investigation, only we look on physical evidence. We also look into statements from other witnesses. If we have a CCTV footage, forensics evidence, and other relevant evidence. So in sexual harassment cases, what is important when we don't have any physical evidence, we have to look into what criminal elements in that sexual harassment itself. In another word, we have to understand sexual harassment become a sexual harassment when the individual or the person feel that feel offended, humiliated, or intimidated by the unwelcome sexual behavior or unwelcome conduct of sexual nature. So it is really depending much on individual or person acceptance or perceive of that particular action. So for police side, the statement of the victims or complainant is important, and also the condition of the victims on that particular moment, or what are the action have been taken right after the incident, whether she or he scream or tell to somebody, the physical condition, shaking, or the effect on her psychology and emotional, or she or he has the effect of trauma. So this is where our counselor or psychologists play a role. They are the one who will do the assessment on the victim, or in some cases refer them to the hospitals to get an assessment on their traumatized or the victim condition, so that we know the reliability of the victim statement.
Ah, I see. So then what are your police procedures, assuming you find that there is a case of sexual harassment that has happened, right? So what are your police procedures after that when you start investigating?
The SOP to investigate same as other sexual cases. So if involved physical, then we will refer to the hospital, or as I mentioned before, we still refer to the victim to the hospital if we feel that the victim needs assistance from the hospital. If the cases involve messaging to handphone, Instagram, social media, or video recording, so we will collaborate with MCMC, or we will send the device to forensic to extract all the evidence of conversation. So other than that, we record statement witnesses. It is not necessarily that the witness must present in that a place when the incident happened. But as I said earlier, the person who become the first individual who have been affected by the crime, or that the victim share with, also can be witness.
That's very interesting actually. So let's say after you investigate already, the victim does want to press charges, for example, and then you have the sexual harasser, they're trying to take action against them, right? So what would the punishment be then for sexual harassment?
The punishment, the punishment for the sexual harassment, depending on section that we investigate. For example, for 354 Penal Code, which that person shall be punished with imprisonment for a term which may extend to 10 years, or with fine, or with whipping, or with any two of such punishment. So if involved verbally or gesture intended to insult the modesty of a person, we investigate under section 509 Penal Code. So shall be punished with imprisonment for a term which may extend to 5 years, or with fine, or with both. Or if involved video recording, spread porn images, we will investigate under 290 Penal Code, shall be punished with imprisonment for a term which may extend to 3 years, or with fine, or both. Some cases we also investigate under section 14 Minor Offences Act 1955, like the punishment lesser. It only shall be liable to fine not exceeding 100 ringgit for minor offence.
See. Thank you. Thank you, ASP No Ashikin. That actually transitions me quite nicely to Omar Kuti, because I'd like to know actually what legal recourses are there available to the survivors of sexual harassment for them to take action and such.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Okay, can you hear me?
Yep, we
Right.
can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, so for as far as legal recourses that is available to a particular survivor, generally we will look at least from my perspective and my practice, is more to the criminal element of a particular sexual harassment, which involves, of course, prosecution from the DPP, or the other way around. There are situations where I also act on behalf of the victims or survivors in court to make sure they have their day in court and things are going properly. So, of course, the first and the most important method, I would say, to initiate any form of grievance or complaints and whatnot would be through a police report, and the police report must be lodged as soon as possible. I have seen cases involving whether it's incestuous or it's rape cases, whereby reports were lodged a month or 3 months after the alleged offense. So what happens is that the police will have difficulties, the prosecutor too will have difficulties to prove a case in court, whereby there will be no more DNA evidence, or if there's any hymen test, it will be all hymen tests because it's over 72 hours. So of course, as I said, the most important thing is to lodge a police report as soon as possible. Now, apart from the regular way of doing things, lodging a police report, an individual who has suffered sexual harassment may also consider taking up a civil action to claim for damages. Now, this recourse is available, but I would say it's a bit more difficult because a person who pursue a civil action for damages, compensation and whatnot will have the difficulty of the lack of resources. You do not have the resources to obtain certain medical reports. You don't have the resources to extract information from handphones and things like that, which the police, PDRM, MCMC have the resources to do so. So that is the downside of proceeding in a civil action. But of course, the burden of proof in a civil case is much more easier. It's much more easier to prove your case. Because I believe somewhere in 2016, there was a federal court decision on this, in which it was the sexual harassment claim was made through a counterclaim. You see, the survivor did not sue, but rather was sued for allegedly making false allegation. And in that court case, she lodged a counterclaim against the claimant to say that, look, you have harassed me. And she adduced sufficient evidence and she won the case at the end of the day. So that is the second option that you have. Thirdly, I would say there is a mechanism under the Employment Act. I have not seen firsthand how effective it is, because a lot of us do not know what's the actual mechanism, because the only thing that provides there is, for example, an employee may lodge an inquiry or lodge a report to the employer so that the employer can start an inquiry, an internal inquiry. Yes, whether or not it was carried out, whether it's properly done, I mean, it's something that we can't really tell for sure. And what if the perpetrator is the employer himself? Would he investigate himself? You know, that's another thing that you have to look at. So I would say these are the main three legal methods provided under the law for you to, you know, go forward with your grievances in terms of sexual harassment.
Yeah, I see. But actually, while I was doing research for this forum, I did come across the Employment Act 1955, right? And it does say that it's the burden of investigation is upon the employer, and the case is up to the employer's own discretion in order to decide whether or not it's a worthwhile case to pursue. If it's not, they can just throw it out. So if I'd like to ask, actually, if your case gets thrown out either by the employer or by the court that you take it up to, are there any other consequences that might occur to the person trying to pursue the claim? And are there any other avenues that you can pursue outside of that once you've already had your case thrown out once? Sorry, I think you're still muted.
In terms of case being thrown out, it depends on what sort of case. If it's a criminal matter, you can still, you know, appeal and appeal again, depending on the prosecutor and the evidence available. Now, as far as a civil claim is concerned, you too can also appeal, at least to the appellate courts, to keep trying. But in case where the employer is not taking any action, okay, if you have started the mechanism under the Employment Act and the court, let's say for both criminal and civil cases, have decided, you know, look, there is just no case, then from my experience, there's nothing much a particular survivor can do. And the repercussion that will be faced by such survivor is that they'll be faced with, of course, social stigma. People will blame them for, you know, you lodge a fake report, you have defamed another person, and then you'll be looked down by your family and friends. These are very common. So there is a potential, of course, there is a potential defamation sort of a suit that may be mounted against you. But of course, if you have all the evidence, you still have a chance to defend yourself. But you have to live to a certain extent, knowing that the system has failed you to that extent.
Leanne,
Can I add on to something? Oh yes, Amelia.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about what Omar has talked about in terms of repercussions on the victim or the person making a report. So statistics show that, and this is gathered in countries like US, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. After a person lodged a complaint, almost 70 to 80% of victims lost their employment within the first year of making that complaint in itself. So that's 70 to 80% of complainants who would not just face, social stigma and like emotional, like anxiety, depression and all of that, but would also lose their income within the first year after making that report. Some of them were dismissed, some of them were constructively dismissed. But the point is they would have to be put in a position where they don't have a job after 1 year of doing that. The second thing that I wanted to look at is, aside from that, and this is also consistent with some statistics gathered in Asia, like countries in countries like Korea, where 90% of victims of sexual harassment suffer secondary trauma because they lodge a complaint. So what is secondary trauma? So when we talk about sexual harassment, it has to come with the recognition that the act of sexual harassment is already an extremely traumatic experience. So the laws and the mechanism and the legal recourse that we provide for victims has to take into account that and make sure that it doesn't exacerbate that trauma or cause new trauma. So how do you exacerbate a trauma? For example, if your process would require the victim to tell the stories like 20 times to 5 different departments in a course of investigation in a week, then that's that's a little bit much, not just for a person who is under duress, but for any one of us to have to repeat a story like 20 times. I've seen a situation where a person lodged a complaint to HR, and then in HR you talk to the executive, and then the executive passes the case to the manager, and then she would have to repeat the complaint again, and then the case is passed to the head of department, and then she would have to repeat it again, and then it's passed to the legal team, and she would have to repeat it again. So it's a lot of repeating of the same things, which is not bad per se, because I understand that sometimes you want to check for consistency of stories, but the way in which it is done would determine whether or not you're doing it in a sensitive way or not. So for example, forcing someone to recall the entirety of the incident in one sitting, for example. So if someone gets too triggered and they can't continue, give them room to stop and come back and continue, for example. Or sometimes they give them their own time. Don't keep interjecting when they are trying to tell a story. Don't put words in their mouth and things like that. So that is something that could exacerbate existing trauma. But additional trauma could be things like being disbelieved, being doubted, the fact that you are isolated in the workplace, you are vilified, you are being subject of office rumors or school rumors for that matter. So all of these things are things that cause secondary trauma. So I'm going to repeat the statistics again. 70 to 80% of victims lose their job within the first year of filing a complaint, and about 90% of victims face secondary trauma beyond the trauma of sexual harassment in itself, which is why when we're looking at the different recourse that we make, we have to understand the fact that it has to be done with the view of making sure that we are not causing further harm and further trauma to the victim. So that would be my perspective that I would like to add on.
Thanks, Amelia. I actually have a question for ASP Noor Ashikin. Omar mentioned just now that, okay, if there are some physical evidence, you actually make a report within 24 hours to 48 hours. In our earlier session, ASP Noor Ashikin also shared something that when the harassment is actually in the form that is not physical, it can be in the form of through phones, through video calls, or to certain gestures, for example. So in this kind of situations, how do we go about it, or what are the evidence, or what are the things that will be helpful for the victims to keep in order to lodge the report?
I mentioned earlier, if involving physical contact, then we need an DNA. But if not, as I said, the witness, the statement of the witness is very important. The action or a statement of victim itself, action taken right after the incident, what she's what action that she or he is taken right after the incident is important. So if she or he tells somebody, so we will record the statement of the witness. So it will help to strengthen the case. Other than CCTV footage, forensics evidence, and all kind of things.
Just to add on a bit to DSP earlier, in most sexual offenses, including sexual harassment, there is almost no direct evidence. I mean, I've been in a lot of prosecution cases where there's no direct evidence, because if there is direct evidence, prosecution will have a very easy day in court. So generally, what the court will look at is something we call as circumstantial evidence, the surrounding factors. What happened? Did the victim or the survivor lodge a report as soon as possible? Or did she consult another individual, or was he or she persuaded by somebody? You know, there's a lot of elements that the court will look at. So that's why it's very important to lodge the report as soon as possible. And of course, the police will be able to identify, or will be able to pinpoint who will be the potential witnesses in terms of circumstantial evidence. Just to add on that.
All right, thanks, Noor Ashikin, and thanks, Omar.
All right. Thank you to both of you for your additional viewpoints. It is a very interesting discussion. But now we move on to the impact of sexual harassment on the victims themselves, because I'm sure there will be an impact. That's why it becomes a problem. Kogi, if you would elaborate, perhaps.
Yeah. Okay. Hello, hi everybody. Good morning. Okay, yes. Basically, of offense. Okay, particularly we're talking about sexual harassment. Of course, it gives them an impact. It's not even psychologically, but also it gives an emotional breakdown and also physical effects too. What I mean like here, psychological effect is that when the person can't process their healing process, which means they can't go through it, whereby they go through the trauma. As soon once they have the sexual harassment incident happens to them, first, if let's say as what the other panels will say that without launching a report after a particular months, like 1 month or 2 months, because they will be like thinking like whether should I or shouldn't I. So at that moment, they already have that psychological effect over that, whereby they feel the shame, guilt. Are they in the right situation to do so or not to act? What will be consequences if I step into to launch a report? Do I can bear with that? How long is the time duration do I think to take on the effect as well? So if you talk about the emotional breakdown from the psychology where they feel that it's like how to say all the sadness, the angry will be coming onto it, where they feel that if they launch report, yeah, I might be getting a justice. But what about this sexual harassment, which is like no physical contact? I mean, it's very difficult. So that's where they're having their emotional breakdown. Apart from that, the physical part that they can actually go through is that they might be feeling that to self-destructive, like, okay, why this thing happens to me? Put a self-thing on them. Apart from that, they would say that, okay, there's no point for me to survive because I feel that I'm helpless right now. So this is almost the psychological part that most of the victims, doesn't matter. It always varies by the cases and also varies by the age group. The way the adult, the way the children, and the way of employees go through, it's all are totally different on the psychological emotional part. It's all on the type of cases and also various on this. But basically, they will just go through this emotional, psychology, and also the physical breakdown.
Actually, that is hard for them. It must be because they go through a trauma, and it is even processing the trauma is difficult. And sexual harassment is some kind of really intimate way of hurting somebody. But aside from the victims themselves, is there any impact on the social circles, say the friends or families of the survivors? And if so, what can that impact manifest as, maybe? Kogi, if you could perhaps like share your viewpoints on this as well.
Me? Did you say me or?
Anyone who wants to take the question
cool.
is welcome.
Well, obviously I'm not a mental health expert here, but wait.
Some members will be having the impact whereby they feel sometimes, oh, I couldn't be there.
Okay. Kogi, your line is actually breaking.
To do about that.
That you will also family members to do a trauma. So this is also another impact that make the client and also, I mean, the particular victim and also the family to go through the state of trauma. And for friends.
Okay, while waiting for Kogi's connection to come back, from the little thing that I hear just now, I think she's mentioning about psychoeducating the family members on the stages of trauma, so they would know how to handle if someone in the family actually faces a trauma. And to add on to emotion trauma of the victim herself or himself, sharing from experience, another besides feeling disbelief, guilt, or hopeless, someone, those that go through trauma, they may also feel that disbelief, like I can't believe this actually happened to me. Or another thing that going through the mind is like, what just happened? And if the trauma or if the incident is something that is not really physical, there is no penetration, there's no touching, and it's in the form of words or graphics, that person may even have this kind of thought where they feel that maybe it's this abuse or this harassment is actually too small to actually make a report. And I think what we are trying to establish here is this not true, because even though there's no physical, it is still possible to make a report. So, but these are some of the general things that a person will go through, the feeling that, okay, maybe it's not important enough for me to make a report. Maybe it's just a small matter, but we know this matter actually does impact the person a lot.
Along that vein then, actually, because we did hear earlier, as Amelia shared, and as you've just shared, that victims have a lot of difficulty when it comes to disclosing that they have undergone sexual harassment. It's why the cases are sometimes brought up so later on, and then you have difficulty prosecuting other people and trying to bring the case to light. So what are the common struggles of disclosure when you've undergone sexual harassment?
Common disclosure, you mean in terms of telling another person, or?
In terms of, well, first of all, voicing out, because you did say that only 50% of people even say it, right? But also later on with lodging police reports, with bringing it to court as a case, so on and so forth.
Okay, okay. Like what Joanne said earlier, actually, that was that sort of captures a little bit of one of the biggest thing that would prevent or delay the process of speaking up. It's because it takes time to process that event yourself. It's not something that you can immediately come to terms with and you immediately label as sexual harassment. For a lot of people, when it happens, they sort of like, they're still in a state where they're feeling like, did that just happen? Am I thinking too much about it? Am I overreacting? Am I making a big deal out of nothing? Am I just, feeling too sensitive today? So they sort of like go through this like roller coaster of emotions where they're trying to assess and ascertain their emotions themselves. So that process can take time, which is why sometimes people speak up a day after they're sexually harassed, or a year after they're sexually harassed, or 3 or 10 years after they're sexually harassed, because the pacing in which this process takes place is different for everyone. Like I said, it also comes with your age. It also comes with your experiences in life. Like when I was sexually harassed as probably a teenager, it took me the longest time to even figure out that, that was sexual harassment. But if I'm sexually harassed right now as a 31-year-old woman, it would probably be something that I can, that I can identify a lot quicker. So because of that lack of education and awareness and things like that. So once you have come to terms to that, it's whether or not you want to say something, and who do you say something to? Now, at this juncture, the challenge is this. Most of the victims that I have supported would ask me this question: but I have no evidence. They constantly say that. I want to make a police report, but I have no evidence. What do I do? And this is where I want to highlight a little bit what the SP have said earlier, is that the way in which we can collect evidence is also not, it doesn't mean that just because you don't have a bruise, it doesn't mean there's no evidence, we look at circumstantial evidence as well. And I think we also look at this thing that we call, contemporaneous evidence. So the fact that in that moment in time, after it happened, if you were to tell someone, so all of these things are things that can be considered by the police because they are the experts in collecting evidence. And I think my advice to victims in this situation is make that police report first, and let the police worry about, you know, the gathering evidence and whatnot, because that's their job and they know best how to do it. If you have questions, it is also best to direct it to the police officers themselves. I've been told previously that the cases, not all sexual harassment cases are directly investigated by the D11, and the SP, please correct me on this if I'm wrong. But all of these cases are you know, will go through D11 because they do review it, they do manage it on a higher level. So if you don't feel comfortable talking to the IO, for example, reach out to the officers at D11. My experience with D11 in terms of like asking for information and all that, they're very helpful. So, you know, reach out and ask. Don't make assumptions. Ask the police officers what's going to happen. I'm not sure where my case is. I want to get an update. Reach out to the police officer. Reach out to the IO. More often than not, they will tell you what's going on. They will pick up your call. They will tell you, you know, what they will try their best to answer your question. If you're unhappy with that answer, you can always escalate that. Like I say, if you're not happy with the answer that IO gave, go to D11. And if your case is classified NFA and you feel like, oh, why is my case NFA? You can also write to the authorities to ask them to review the NFA status. So the point I'm trying to say is sometimes as victims, we are trying to take 10 steps at a time. We're trying to already guess, you know, what about evidence? What about this? What about that? For me, take it one step at a time. And when you're going to lodge a police report, it will be a difficult process because speaking up about it is difficult. So, you know, get your support system, you know, bring a friend, bring an ally, or if you want to get a legal, legal aid worker from, you know, WAO, AWAM, or, you know, all the women's organization, do that, reach out for help. But my point is don't try to solve too many problems at the same time. Take it one step at a time, and hopefully that will, you know, solve a barrier in terms of worrying about evidence too much and things like that. The final thing that I wanted to say is, in terms of this is huge also trauma in terms of being disbelieved, or sometimes, you know, when you are saying something that people will say something that will make you yourself feel really bad because people are just questioning you and questioning your reality. I've worked with a victim that literally said to me, I don't want to report my case because at least if it stays with me, I know the truth. No one is going to second guess me. If I tell to anyone, everyone is going to question my truth. So it's fine. I'm suffering on my own, but at least my truth is my truth, you know? And obviously that's really sad to hear, but I think in this situation, like I said, having that support is you know, is really important. And if you're dealing with you know, investigate, so there are two parts here. If you're talking about people in public who disbelieve you and things like that, I think you need to know when to shut it out, and not pay too much attention to what people are saying on social media, for example, and things like that. If it's something that happens during the course of investigation, if let's say you feel like there's something said that is really wrong, that the police officer said something that you feel really, really unfair, really, really wrong, really, really insensitive, there's also an internal complaint channel by the PDRM, because they allow for complaints to be made on, I think, issues relating to integrity and issues relating to breach of SOPs and things like that. So probably the DSIP can talk about this a lot better later on. But the point I wanted to make is there are avenues actually that we can explore, but take it one step at a time. So that would be my best advice.
Okay, actually, that's a lot of like information as well. But you did mention about how a lot of people will tend to disbelieve victims, and therefore they will just feel worse about themselves. They will start second guessing themselves. Kogi, if you don't mind, how could we then constructively address and support these people who have been directly or indirectly affected by sexual harassment or sexual crimes or something of that nature? Because we don't want to be re-traumatizing these people as well. They've already gone through so much.
Okay, thank you, and I'm very sorry my line was so bad I couldn't finish up what I have told earlier. Okay, all right. Basically, I would agree what does Miss Amelia said. Of course, when it comes to a case when so many people like asking questions, in a government setting, you'll be like identity to the hospital counselors, and you have to have the welfare department counselors, you have the NGO counselors to go in, and you have even PDRM. Okay, basically, what we would like try to do is that if to make sure that they get the best support is that to not criticize them, which means if they like, because sometimes you have to repeat many times. Yeah, I do agree. They have to know what has happened and how they can provide the support services, especially when you're in a hospital, when you're in a welfare department. So when it comes to PDRM, of course, the investigations to go in. But one of our main force here is that we will reduce the trauma by making them ready to open up, to talk back again. Okay, because why? When you talk back again, you re-traumatize again. Of course, in that situation, I think my connection is going to lose again. Okay, right. So basically, yes, back to the thing. When you come into G11, we will try to reduce the trauma to make sure that are you really ready to talk about it or not? So because when you traumatize again, they might putting for them to say, why should I? Why, what's they do the self-blame again. So like what Miss Emilia said that in terms of like rather than imposing themselves to criticize, we will help them to give the support services, like listen to them. We will really listen to them. That means we are ready to listen rather than many questions to them, not like more why questions to them, like why it happened, why you are the person, because they will put the self-blame for themselves. Yeah, why is it me? Why is why the whole public is asking me, and why should I be there? Should I be there? They put a self-blame. So no, I would always say that never put a self-blame on yourself. So that's how you can survive. Other than that is the trust. The most important element is the trust. When you feel that you've been sexually abused or harassed, doesn't matter physically or non-physically, get someone and share with them that you feel trusted at the very first, because you might be hesitant to launch a report at the very beginning because you might don't know what's the consequences. So get a person to say about it, but make sure that person are reliable, which means they can really give you support. Okay, like what other people, admin panel advise that they can direct you to go to the legal department, they can direct you to the launch of police report, they can really direct you to certain places. Yeah, so in that, that's where support services are works on. So they feel that, okay, I feel safe at the very beginning, that all of my fun, all of whatever happens to me are being said to someone, and I feel release of it. So thereafter, you are when the person, when the victim are able to think rationally, then they can take the steps to launch a report and so on. So with that, the trust, of course, it will help them to feel much more safer that, okay, I have to say. Okay, other than that, you shouldn't be judgmental to them. The more you being judgmental, you are really killing them, actually, because while you are saying that, oh, you should have done that, or you should have done that, there's no point of being to a person and saying that it's a blame, because it's already happened. The next step we have to see is that what we can do to survive and how the survival can bring us to the well-being in the future. Actually. So this will be the how the survival thinks that a victim can do so, from my point of view.
Actually, that does lead us quite well into the next question, because in at least in Malaysia, you see a lot and you hear a lot about victim blaming instead of blaming the harasser. You hear a lot in the news, for example, of people going, oh, well, they shouldn't have been dressed so scandalously. They were inviting harassment. What are your opinions on this, all of you, actually?
Okay, maybe I'll go first. That's one thing. Okay. Yes, basically, most I can say is that many of the clients that I've shared with me, okay, they will say that, oh no, it is maybe my fault. When they talk to me, when they say it's maybe my fault. I've been socialized so much, so I've been harassed, and I've been the pinpoint for the perpetrator to do to me. But I feel that these factors, like you can address a sense of other things, it is not really important. It's not an element that to be blamed, actually, because it all depends on how the think and the attitude of a person. if let's say I'm dressed sexily or I will be having a social activity, it doesn't mean that I'm asking a person to come. Yeah, I'm not inviting in such a way. So we have to tell that client that do not ever put on a self-blame, because they will say, oh, because you're dressed up in such a way, yeah, like what you say. But no, it doesn't mean, it is not how the victim supposed to take it. Okay, I will always explain that it is not on the wrong part. Okay, you are going on it. It is just the view and the attitude of a person holding and the perception of the public to put the blame in such a way. So I'll always make sure to they understand that never ever put the blame on yourself. Unlike the victim itself feels that she's supposed to be blamed. There are two different consequences here. Okay, some is like known to be happen and some is unknown to be happen. So most of them is unknown to be happen. So never ever put the self-blame, say that I will be the cause for this thing to happen. That's my point of view.
Yeah, Leanne, to add on to that, I think the second layer is it's more on, I think when other people and society imposes certain expectations on you, what you should, how you should behave, what you should wear and things like that. And victim blaming essentially happens when there is an added burden, or there is an expectation on victims or potential victims to do certain things to prevent themselves from being a victim to begin with. So that's basically what victim blaming is. And I've seen this happening by way of when we put when we give attention to things that are irrelevant instead of things that are relevant into determining as whether or not that sexual harassment happened. For example, if I go to you and I say I've been sexually harassed in a nightclub, I don't even think people call it nightclub anymore, but in a club, and I said that I've been sexually harassed, and the first question you ask me is, were you drunk? And I was like, yep, okay, probably understandable. Yeah, maybe I was drinking. And then you ask me, what are you wearing? Okay, now it's going down like a weird path, right? So instead of asking me what happened, do you recognize the face of the perpetrator? Do you think you can identify him? Instead of asking all of those questions, you're asking all the wrong questions pertaining to my behavior, my choices, my decisions, what I choose to wear, what time of night I choose to still be out, and things like that. So the reason why that is so harmful is because it misplaced our attention to things that actually matter. As a society, then we get, it becomes sensationalized. Oh, it could be a situation where people are focused on the race and the religion and the gender of this person and the choices that she or he is making, versus the fact that what actually happened and finding out on that front. And victim blaming happens in different ways, at different levels as well. I've seen it happening in the process of investigation, in an organization point of view, where instead of actually doing an investigation, you say, well, this guy or this perpetrator, he's harmless. Actually, he's just a very awkward person. He's socially awkward, doesn't understand social cues and things like that. So these are like, we also give excuses for behavior. And I've seen people saying things like, oh my God, pity this perpetrator, he or she probably was just trying to flirt and ask you out on a date, and then you have to overreact. So again, these are like, very things that are very, very, very misplaced in terms of the way we react to something. And when we talk about victim blaming, we also have to understand that sometimes it comes from a place of actual care and actual concern for the victim. Sometimes, like mothers would tell their daughters, don't go out too late at night, come back before a certain time. So unfortunately, that creates a culture of victim blaming, because again, there is an expectation that you cannot go out at night, you cannot go out past a certain time. It is dangerous for you to do certain things, and therefore by doing something is dangerous willingly, you're willingly putting yourself up for risk. So because that's the connection, right? So I think we have to be very, very careful with things like that. And when we talk about, people who giving out advice because they care about it, which is why I think it's bad when our reaction to sexual harassment is to to ask women to do more things. Like we recently heard that women should take up karate classes, to prevent them from being sexually harassed. We have heard a couple of years back that people actually invented nail polish that can identify if your drink has been spiked. We have heard so many things that are invented to help women take care of themselves. But this is wrong because, again, you're shifting the burden of creating a safe environment onto women when it is completely out of their control. They can't control their environment, whether or not their environment is safe or not. So from the perspective of nation building and enforcement itself, the burden has to be placed on every single member of society because of the idea of collective security in itself. I can say so many things about victim blaming, but I think I will stop there and let maybe Omar say something this time.
I have nothing much to add. I mean, essentially, victim blaming is a very bad thing when it comes to sexual harassment, because you will start to, when so many people are blaming you for what you have done or what has happened, you start to second guess yourself and you may start blaming yourself. And that may or may not, to a certain extent, cause you to feel like, okay, I'm fed up. I don't want to go on with this. No, might as well I just move on with my life. I recently had a similar case somewhere last month where a rape survivor came to me and said she wants to retract a police report. She lodged a police report within 48 hours, as soon as she could. Her drink was spiked and things like that. She was taken away by someone who she's familiar with, and she lodged a police report, and then everyone started to second guess her. Everyone started to doubt her. Of course, PDRM is very good. There are a lot of very good officers, dedicated officers, but sometimes we meet some bad apples from CID departments who may not be trained to handle such cases. So there have been questions that were irrelevant, as what Miss Emilia was pointing out earlier, where they ask her, look, you minum. Of course, she said, yes, I had some drinks. So you minum tu, you setuju lah. No, that kind of question. So that actually made her, felt fed up. She felt helpless. And moreover, they did ask her, look, your clothes were not torn up, so it's not rape. And she just couldn't react to that. And she just traumatized since then. And she came up to me and she opened up, she cried. And eventually we had to, refer to D11 and whatnot, just to assist her, just to comfort her that not everybody's like this. There's a lot of people around you who wants to help you. But yeah, as pointed out, when you start blaming the victim, that actually discouraged them from taking action. And the perpetrator still out there is somebody that you may know, you may be close to, and he's still there. He's going to be watching you at the end of the day. Yeah. So yeah, stay away from victim blaming. Try to understand the victim. What I'm trying to say is not to blame the perpetrator straight away, because as a defense counsel, generally we will say, a person is innocent until proven guilty. That's for sure. But do not doubt a person, especially someone who's vulnerable, who come forward and bring a very legitimate concern or harassment allegation. Try to take them seriously. Try to investigate and give them the right support that they need.
Yes, sorry, Lian. I just wanted to add something else, because Omar actually reminded me of something. Like what Miss Kogi said earlier on about understanding how difficult it is to speak up. So this is like more like a piece of advice to people on social media, or if you're a friend, if you're someone come to you and say, they've been sexually harassed and whatnot. My advice is it's very common for you to say to want more information. I think sometimes we're curious, you want to know what happened, what did you do, is there some context to all of this? But my advice is, if you don't recognizing that potentially this person is going through extreme trauma, knowing that if you don't have nothing better to say, it's better not to say anything. I've seen this happen on social media where people they don't believe the victim, and I mean, I disagree with that point of view, but you have a right to disagree, and if you disagree, you want to ask questions and whatnot, fine. But if you don't have a good way of saying it, or if you just want to attack the person, might as just shut up, basically. Just don't say anything, because you don't know how you can exacerbate someone's trauma. So because we can never be 100% sure whether or not whatever this person is saying is true or not, right? In the context of social media, someone is saying something, we have never met this person, we see a tweet being retweeted like hundreds of times, and then we're like, is this real? Is this not real? You don't know. But acknowledging the fact that it might be real, and this person is going through so much hurt and trauma, don't do anything to cause more harm and damage to this person. Reframe yourself. So live by these words. If you got nothing better to say, or if there's nothing you could do to say to make someone else feel better, say nothing instead.
All right. Finally, we get to our last planned question before we move to the Q&A, right? This is open to the floor. How then, as a society, because as it stands right now, there's a lot of re-traumatization, and it's not to say that we allow it to happen, but a lot of the time it's, as Amelia said, there's a lot of victim blaming. We shame people out of disclosing their stories sometimes, and even the victims themselves feel too ashamed to come out with their sexual harassment stories, right? So how can we as a society work to reduce the statistics of sexual harassment, work to reduce sexual harassment, and possibly eradicate it if we're so hopeful?
Okay, I have two things to say to this. The first one is help us push for the sexual harassment bill that we have heard so many times. We've been, pushing for it for the how many ever years, 8 to 12 years. Help push for it. And the reason why we need a standalone sexual harassment bill is because we need something that's more comprehensive to deal with sexual harassment, that deal with not just the crime or the wrongdoing itself, but also deals with the trauma that sets out proper ways to do it. A comprehensive bill is needed. So how you can help is reach out to your MPs and tell them that you want to see this bill being pushed and debated and passed in Parliament. You can tweet them, you can send them an email, you can talk to them. Make your views known about it. So support the sexual harassment bill. The second thing that we can do as a society is obviously be more vigilant. And by being vigilant, I mean to not create excuses and to not normalize things that are obviously harmful. Like if people pass a sexist or a racist or a wrong, misappropriate comments, don't be that person who laugh along at it. But I have to say, it's difficult. I have been guilty of doing it. Sometimes I was so uncomfortable that the only thing I know what to do in that situation is be like, but we are all learning, we are all improving, we're all trying to be better people, to play our part in a society. So keep learning and keep doing better, keep being vigilant, help people, be kind to one another. I sound like Ellen DeGeneres, but yeah, that's the message.
All right, thank you, Amelia. Could we get any opinions from Omar or from the DSP as well?
I would say we should, as a society, we should, number one, break the bystander effect. I mean, it may not happen to you, but if you take part in it, you will start to be normalized. That's what Amelia pointed out earlier. You could be in an office environment where you and your colleagues are making fun of somebody sexually, with sexual elements and whatnot, and then you just laugh along because you just don't know how to react to it. All it needs is somebody to stand up and say, look, that's not funny. And that will somewhat, put a pause and make everyone think, okay, look, that is not right. And then because if you don't do something like that, you don't break the bystander effect, you just laugh along, you just play along, the whole thing becomes normal, and it just becomes a norm. And in the future, when somebody wants to complain about it, they say, look, it's normal, it's just a joke, come on, chill, relax. Yeah, so I think that's very important. Of course, another thing is to change mindsets of the society. Never blame a survivor or an alleged survivor of sexual harassment on the first instance. Don't do that. Okay, you don't justify something happening just because a person works in a nightclub or she or he dresses very sexily and whatnot. I mean, you can be naked walking in the street. That does not mean you want to be molested, you see. So mindset is very important, and that has to change. That will take a long time, but I think slowly as a society, gets a bit more mature in terms of sexual harassment, I think eventually mindsets will change, and I hope for that.
Okay, from PDRM side, we encourage people to to lodge a police report, but please don't misuse the police report, because of why we do have some cases. They do a sukarela willingly, but so something happened between boyfriend and girlfriend, so they lodge a police report. So please don't do that. We encourage if truly victim come forward to make to lodge a police report. That's from PDRM side.
Okay, from a psychology perspective, I would like to say that you should speak up for yourself. Like what other panelists have said, that self-blaming, and yes, that will be going to exist forever. You can't be stopping that. But to make sure, speak up for yourself. If you think that is wrong and that's not supposed to be a joke, be sensitive to it. The sensitivity will create a self-awareness to everybody actually. That's my opinion.
All right.
I want to add on to something to what Emilia, Omar, ASP, Nur Ashikin, and Kogi have shared. Yes, I believe it's very important that if you have nothing better to say, we don't say it, and victim blaming and encouraging someone to actually speak up for themselves, come forward and make a report. And all this will not be possible if each and every of us here do not take up our role. We may not be able to change immediately how the society will on sexual harassment or the victim blaming attitude that many people still hold. So we may not be able to change the whole society right now, but we can begin with ourselves. What we can do for the society, what we can do at our workplace, what we can do in our group of friends. So when we do that, when we begin to educate the society, when we begin to educate people around us on sexual harassment, on the rights of the victims, and about certain attitudes that are right, is already a very good start, because we can begin. We have 100 participants here today, and if each and every of us here make the difference, we start to take certain steps that are important. We believe in years to come, we will definitely see a difference in when it comes to this manner. So there's something that I would like to add as a take back before we continue to our Q&A session.
All right. Thank you very much, Ms. Joanne, for the excellent closer. First, well, not first. Finally, we move on to the Q&A section. First question to our forum participant, to our panelists, right? What if I heard a sexual song in the supermarket and that gave me an uneasy feeling? Does sexual harassment apply here as well?
Okay, I think that might be I wouldn't say that it would create a situation of sexual harassment per se, because who is the perpetrator in that situation? So is it the person who is in charge of putting a playlist together at the mall, or do you get what I mean? So because it's indirect, but again, so I don't think that would be something that you can lodge a report on sexual harassment per se, but it's definitely inappropriate to be playing like you say, if it's a very sexual song in public, in spaces, you know, like you say, in a mall where there's children and all of that. So probably something can still be done about it. You can still maybe file a complaint with the mall, or if I'm not mistaken, probably Omar and ASP can talk about this. I think that there's also like offenses about, you know, things that are inappropriate in public, you know, and things like that. You can probably look into that. But I'm not sure you would be able to lodge it would be a sexual harassment complaint per se, yeah.
ASP and Kogi, would you perhaps have anything else that you wanted to add in terms of the procedures and such in such a case?
The sexual harassment, it might be a case depends to the situation. And like I said, again, it's depending much on what individual perceive or acceptance by the individual on that particular thing. So if someone lodge a police report, then we have to investigate whether there is an element of sexual harassment.
And I think the police will have a bit of an investigation nightmare, in the sense that who is the one who did this? You see, who are they going to pin the blame on? I mean, if you look at a legal point of view, actus reus mens rea, I mean, who is the one who actually uploaded the song into the playlist? Who was the one who gave the green light to play the song in public? Whether it was accidental, who is the victim and whatnot? Who's going to come to court and testify what was the lyrics of the song? So I think PDRM will have a bit of a nightmare when it comes to investigation. I think this one we can, I mean, it's a very thin line, but this, I think it's more on being offended by a song than being sexually harassed by a song in a mall. I mean, that's just my point of view on that.
Right. So then we move on to the second question. What if someone was sexually abused by someone in higher authority that might affect their career? How would you then advise them?
I think that's basically everything that we've been talking about earlier on. So because, well, first thing is usually the term sexual abuse we use to describe victims of who are underage usually. But in this situation, for someone who is sexually assaulted or harassed by someone in a position of power, if it happens in the course of employment, everyone has been saying lodge a police report because that's just something you should do. But another alternative for you is to maybe file an internal complaint through the grievance channel at the workplace. If you don't trust that, because if it's your boss, you probably want to go higher up, maybe go to the board of directors and things like that. But generally, to reiterate what everyone has been saying, you can still lodge a police report. And if you don't feel safe and you want immediate action to be taken, I think you can ask for orders of protection, or you can also look at things like, in the context of a workplace, ask to be moved to a different department, for example. Or you can say, I don't want to work with this person in the team. Can I please be moved to a different, change your desk and things like that. I think, yeah, there are certain things that could be done, but lodge a police report ultimately.
All right, thank you for the elaboration. Our third question from the audience is so far, how many have been charged with sexual harassment, like actually charged in court with sexual harassment? They make a note here. I guess it's just the tip of the iceberg.
I think I have answered that question earlier for charging rate. Most of the cases we charge in the court, so no problem on that. If we have enough evidence, then we charge.
Just to add on a little bit, from my observation in courts as well, I do think, yes, there are a lot of cases being brought to court, being charged, a lot of directions, for individuals to be charged in court. But there are instances where sometimes when the survivor retracts the report halfway during trial, or sometimes they have out of court settlement between the perpetrator and the victim, so the case may be dropped eventually. So I mean, that's another limitation that's beyond the control of PDRM as well. And also, most of the cases that are brought to court involves a male harassing a female, for example. I think it's very, very, very rare, if any, of a case being brought by the police or PDRM to show that a woman who actually harass sexually, or another male harassing another male sexually. I mean, there's not many cases on that, or at least I've not seen any in court so far. So I think, yeah, there's still a lot of cases, and I think they're still underreporting, because generally male do not want to report. I mean, there's always this social stigma. Look, I have to man up. And, society will treat you and look at you differently. Look, are you sure you have been sexually harassed by another guy? Why did you not defend yourself? And things like that. And same thing as what has been mentioned by all the other panelists. You have to go through the trauma over and over again, and the prospect that you have to go to court and explain to the judge and then be cross-examined by the defense counsel that you have been harassed by another guy, assuming the victim is a guy. That is just something that will put people off. Generally.
But having said that, I want to commend that question because I think it's very, very important to always ask how many reports are we getting, what is the rate in which we're charging people, what is the conviction rate. I think it's very important that would allow us to properly analyze how effective are existing mechanisms. And I'm not sure, ASP, I actually have like a follow-up question to that. Is information pertaining to rate of charging and conviction, is that readily available for public to check?
No, I don't think so. For charging rate, we police we have the statistic on charging rate, but not on convicted. Convicted usually in court do have a statistic, but I don't think public can access.
All right, thank you for the additional question. Actually, it's quite interesting and it's quite useful as well to know what information is public access. Unfortunately, since we don't have enough time, we'll just wrap up with one more question. If someone makes a rape joke, although it doesn't directly involve the recipient, can it count as sexual harassment? Especially if, say, the rape joke involves a woman and the person hearing the rape joke or the one being told the rape joke is another woman.
Yeah, it can. If it fulfills all three elements of sexual harassment that I talked about earlier, it can be. Like I said, the fact that both of them are women does not mean it's not possible for them to sexually harass another person. And I have seen sexual harassment being done in a form of a joke. So a rape joke could be one of them. But again, like I said, it's hard for me to give a blanket answer. Because in sexual harassment, you have to look at the details of the case. You have to look at the circumstances. You have to look at what is actually being said. What is the context? What are the relationships? So you kind of have to look at all of that. So it's hard for me to say blanketly all rape jokes are sexual harassment. I cannot say that, but it is possible that it could be sexual harassment if it fulfills the criteria.
Okay, there is one question which I think is very important, so I will just quickly address it. It's from participant Nick Naslan. How about if someone sexually harassed by a family member, what to do and what is the best advice? So for here, I guess if you don't have any other caretakers that you can trust to accompany you, you can call up Talian Kasih 15999, or you can actually call AWAM or WAO, and there are personnel that will be able to assist and support you to make a report, and they will teach you what to do. Even if you are brave enough, you can directly go to OSCC, a one-stop crisis center at PPUM or a certain government hospital, and there will be social worker and assistant that will be there to assist you. Okay, so thank you everyone for being here. And for the rest of the participants, if you have any more questions, you can directly email to us. And we will try our best to forward the questions to the panels. And once we have the answer, we will actually share it with the participants who asked. Is that okay with the panel? Since we do not have time here. All right, so thank you so much once again, ASP Noor Ashikin, Ms. Kogi, Ms. Emilia, and Mr. Omar for being with us. Again, we are really grateful for the session today, and we hope that after the session today, we will be able to ask ourselves what we can do and what are the roles that we can play when it comes to sexual harassment. So thank you again, everyone. And for those of you who need e-certificate, please fill in the link and we will provide you with the e-certificate.